Let me start with something that almost everyone has felt but very few people talk about honestly. You finally walk away from someone who was bad for you. Maybe they lied to you repeatedly. Maybe they made you feel small. Maybe they were emotionally unavailable, or manipulative, or just consistently chose everything and everyone over you. And you did the hard thing. You walked away. Or maybe they left. Either way, the relationship ended. And then, sometimes at 2 in the morning, sometimes in the middle of a perfectly good day, sometimes when a certain song comes on or you smell something familiar, it hits you. You miss them. Not a little. Deeply. Painfully. In a way that makes absolutely no rational sense given everything they put you through. And along with that missing comes something almost worse than the missing itself. The shame of it. The confusion. The voice in your head saying, why are you missing someone who hurt you? What is wrong with you? And I want to tell you today that there is nothing wrong with you. In fact, what you are experiencing is one of the most human, most neurologically predictable, most psychologically complex experiences a person can go through. And understanding why it happens might be one of the most freeing things you ever do for yourself. Let's start in the brain, because the brain is where this whole story begins and it is far stranger and far more powerful than most people realize. When you are in a relationship with someone, especially an intense one, your brain releases a cocktail of chemicals that are genuinely, measurably, scientifically similar to what happens during drug addiction. The primary player here is dopamine, which is your brain's reward and motivation chemical. Dopamine is not actually the pleasure chemical, which is a common misconception. Dopamine is the anticipation chemical. It surges not when you get the reward, but when you are anticipating it, chasing it, hoping for it. And this is where things get really important. In a stable, consistently loving relationship, dopamine flows in a relatively steady, calm way. But in a painful, inconsistent relationship, where sometimes they are wonderful and sometimes they are terrible, where sometimes they give you everything and sometimes they give you nothing, the dopamine system goes into overdrive. The unpredictability itself is what drives the chemical surge. Your brain becomes addicted not to the person exactly, but to the cycle. The hope, the chase, the occasional reward, the withdrawal, the hope again. It is structurally, neurologically, almost identical to what happens in a gambling addiction or a drug dependency. And just like with any addiction, when the substance is removed, even when you removed it on purpose, even when you know it was destroying you, your brain goes into withdrawal. And withdrawal hurts. That pain, that craving, that desperate missing, is not love betraying your logic. It is your neurochemistry doing exactly what neurochemistry does when a powerful stimulus is suddenly taken away. There is a researcher named Helen Fisher at Rutgers University who has spent decades studying love and heartbreak using brain imaging technology, specifically fMRI machines that can show which parts of the brain are active in real time. She took people who had just been through painful breakups, people who were still intensely missing their former partners, and put them in brain scanners while showing them photos of the person they had lost. And what lit up in their brains was not the areas associated with sadness or grief, though those were active too. What lit up most powerfully were the areas associated with craving and addiction, specifically the ventral tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens, the same brain regions that activate in cocaine addicts when they see cocaine. The brain of a heartbroken person missing someone who hurt them looks, on a scan, remarkably similar to the brain of a drug addict in withdrawal. This is not a metaphor. This is literal biology. You are not being weak or foolish when you miss them. You are going through withdrawal. And nobody shames an addict for feeling the pull of the substance while detoxing. The same compassion belongs to you. But the neuroscience is only part of the story. Because beyond the chemicals, there is something even more profound happening psychologically. And to understand it, we need to talk about something called intermittent reinforcement. This is arguably the single most important concept for understanding why painful relationships are so hard to leave and so hard to recover from. Intermittent reinforcement means giving rewards randomly and unpredictably, rather than consistently. Psychologist B.F. Skinner discovered decades ago that when you reward a behavior sometimes but not always, on an unpredictable schedule, it creates the strongest, most persistent, most resistant to extinction behavior of any reward schedule. He discovered this in animals first. A rat that always gets food when it presses a lever will press it reliably but not obsessively. A rat that gets food randomly, sometimes after one press, sometimes after 50, sometimes not at all, will press that lever almost frantically and will keep pressing it long after the food stops coming entirely, far longer than the rat who always got food. This is intermittent reinforcement. And it is precisely the dynamic of a relationship with someone who hurts you. Sometimes they are incredible, warm, loving, funny, everything you ever wanted. And sometimes they are cold, cruel, dismissive, hurtful. You never know which version you are going to get. And that unpredictability, just like with Skinner's rats, creates an obsessive attachment that is almost impossible to shake. Because your brain is always half convinced that the next press of the lever, the next conversation, the next chance, might be the time the reward comes. And so you keep pressing. And when they're gone, you miss them because some part of your brain is still waiting for the reward that never consistently came. Now let's go even deeper, because there is a layer beneath even this that most people never examine. And it has to do with something called attachment theory, which was developed by British psychiatrist John Bowlby in the mid-20th century and has been built upon by researchers ever since. Attachment theory basically says that the way we learn to attach to caregivers as very young children becomes a template, a deeply embedded blueprint, for how we attach to people for the rest of our lives. There are broadly 4 attachment styles. Secure attachment, where you learned early that people are reliable and loving and will come back when they go. Anxious attachment, where you learn that love is uncertain and you have to work to keep it. Avoidant attachment, where you learn that depending on others leads to pain, so it's safer to be emotionally self-sufficient. And disorganized or fearful attachment, which often develops in children who experience trauma or abuse, where the caregiver was simultaneously the source of comfort and the source of fear. If you grew up in an environment where love was conditional, where affection was given and withdrawn unpredictably, where you had to earn approval or walk on eggshells to keep the peace, your nervous system learned to associate love with anxiety, with effort, with uncertainty. And then when you encounter a person as an adult who recreates that same dynamic, something deeply unconscious in you recognizes it. It feels familiar. And familiar, to the nervous system, feels like home, even when home was painful. This is one of the most painful paradoxes of human psychology. We are drawn to what we know. We are comforted by the familiar even when the familiar hurt us. And when that familiar person is gone, the missing is not just missing them. It is missing the entire emotional landscape that they represented, including, heartbreakingly, the painful parts, because even the painful parts were known, and the known feels safer to the nervous system than the unknown. There is a therapist and author named Patrick Carnes who coined the term trauma bonding to describe something that happens in relationships characterized by cycles of abuse, intermittent reward, and emotional intensity. A trauma bond is a deep, powerful, paradoxical attachment that forms specifically because of the abuse, not in spite of it. The cycle typically goes like this. There is tension and harm. Then there is reconciliation, which is sometimes called the honeymoon phase, where the person who hurt you is suddenly warm and loving and apologetic and everything you wanted them to be. And that contrast, the relief after pain, the love after hurt, creates an emotional intensity that a consistently calm and loving relationship simply cannot match, at least not to someone whose nervous system has been wired by early experience to associate intensity with love. The brain links the relief, the reconciliation, the warmth, to the person who caused the pain in the first place. So the very person who hurt you becomes the person your brain identifies as the solution to the pain they created. You miss them because your brain has learned, on a deep neurological level, that they are the answer to the very problem they caused. It is a closed loop. A trap built from chemistry and experience. And understanding that it is a trap is the first step to finding the door. Now let's talk about something that people almost never admit out loud. Part of why we miss people who hurt us is because of who we were when we were with them. Not who they made us, but who we were trying to be. There is a version of yourself that lived inside that relationship. A hopeful version. A version that was fighting for something, working towards something, investing in something. When the relationship ends, you don't just lose the person. You lose that version of yourself. You lose the narrative you had built around the relationship. The future you had imagined. The person you thought they were becoming, or the person you thought you were helping them become. We grieve not just the person but the story. And stories are extraordinarily powerful things to lose because they give life meaning and direction. When the story ends, especially when it ends badly, there is a disorientation that goes beyond missing a specific person. It is a grief for the meaning that the relationship was holding. There is also something called the idealization trap that springs shut the moment a relationship ends. When someone is in your life, you see them fully, flaws and all. But the moment they are gone, the human mind has a remarkable and deeply unhelpful tendency to edit the memory. The painful moments get softer in recollection. The good moments get brighter. You find yourself missing the best version of the relationship, the version that existed on its best days, while your subconscious quietly archives the worst days in a less accessible folder. This is partly a survival mechanism. The brain protects itself from sustained pain by softening difficult memories over time. But it creates a cruel illusion. You end up missing something that didn't fully exist. A highlight reel of a relationship that, in its full reality, was hurting you. And when you reach out, or consider reaching out, or lie awake wishing things were different, you are reaching for that edited version, not the real one. Keeping the real version in focus, the full picture and not just the good parts, is one of the hardest and most necessary disciplines of healing. Let me tell you about something called the Zygarnik effect, named after Soviet psychologist Bluma Zygarnik, who discovered in the 1920s that people remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks far better and far longer than completed ones. Waiters, for example, could remember in perfect detail every item on a table's open order, but the moment the bill was paid and the task completed, the memory faded almost immediately. Your brain is wired to keep unfinished business alive. To keep returning to open loops until they are closed. And a painful relationship that ends without resolution, without explanation, without justice, without the apology you deserved, without the closure you needed, is one of the most agonizing open loops a human mind can carry. You keep returning to it not because you want to, but because your brain is trying to finish the story. Trying to make sense of it. Trying to find the ending that gives the pain meaning. And the devastating truth is that some endings never come. Some people never apologize. Some questions never get answered. Some stories end mid-sentence. And the mind circles the unfinished business for months, sometimes years, in the exhausting hope that somehow the loop will close. Missing them is often, at its core, missing the resolution. Missing the version of events where things made sense and you got what you deserved. And then there is loneliness. Plain, simple, devastating loneliness. Human beings are social animals in the most literal biological sense. We are not designed for isolation. Our nervous systems regulate each other. A process called co-regulation means that being physically near people you are attached to literally calms your autonomic nervous system, slows your heart rate, reduces cortisol levels, and makes you feel safe at a physiological level. When an attachment figure is removed, even one who was harmful, the nervous system experiences something close to a threat response. The absence of their physical presence, their voice, their smell, the particular way they made the air in a room feel different, creates a genuine biological disturbance. You might not like who they were as a person in your most rational, clear-headed moments. But your body misses their presence because bodies attach to what they know, not to what is good for them. And our world today, as connected as it looks on the surface, can be profoundly lonely. When one significant relationship ends, the void can feel enormous, and almost anything feels better than that void, even the memory of someone who hurt you. There's another piece of this that is uncomfortable to say but important to say. Sometimes we miss people who hurt us because some part of us hasn't fully accepted that the relationship was as harmful as it was. We use words like complicated or difficult or messy, softer words that keep us from arriving at the harder truth. Because arriving at the full truth means accepting that someone we loved, someone we chose, someone we gave real pieces of ourselves to, was not who we needed them to be and perhaps was not capable of being that person. And that acceptance requires grieving not just the relationship but our own judgment, our own hope, our own investment. It requires sitting with the painful question of how we ended up there in the first place. And many people, quite understandably, would rather circle in the softer pain of missing than face the sharper pain of fully seeing. Missing them keeps the possibility alive, however small, however irrational. And possibility, even false possibility, is more comfortable than finality. But here is what I want you to hear very clearly. Missing someone who hurt you does not mean you should go back. This is the distinction that matters most and gets the most confused. The missing is real. The pain of their absence is real. The longing, the chemistry, the memories, the grief, all of it is real. But real feelings are not always reliable guides to real decisions. You can miss someone deeply and still know with equal certainty that returning to them would hurt you again. You can love someone genuinely and still understand that loving them from a distance, or not at all, is the safest and healthiest version of that love. The missing doesn't mean you were wrong to leave or wrong to let them go. It means you were human enough to attach, brave enough to invest, and now honest enough to grieve. All of that is something to be respected, not ashamed of. Healing from this kind of missing is not a straight line and it doesn't happen on a schedule that makes sense to anyone watching from the outside. Well-meaning people will tell you to just move on, or that you deserve better, or that you need to stop thinking about them. And they are right about some of that, but the delivery misses something important. You cannot logic yourself out of a neurochemical withdrawal. You cannot decide your way out of a trauma bond on a Tuesday afternoon. Healing requires time because the brain needs time to literally rewire itself away from the patterns the relationship created. It requires new experiences that teach your nervous system new ways to feel safe. It requires building a relationship with yourself that is strong enough that the absence of that other person stops feeling like a missing limb and starts feeling more like a scar. Present, visible, a reminder of something that happened, but no longer bleeding. Therapy, particularly approaches like EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or attachment-focused therapy, or somatic therapy, which works with how trauma lives in the body and not just the mind, can be genuinely transformative for people stuck in these patterns. Not because they erase the feelings but because they help you process the unfinished business, close the open loops that the Zeigarnik effect keeps returning you to, and begin to update the attachment blueprint that has been sending you toward painful relationships in the first place. And I want to close with this. The fact that you miss someone who hurt you is not evidence of weakness. It is evidence of your capacity to love, to attach, to hope, and to invest in another human being. Those are not small things. Those are among the most valuable qualities a person can possess. The problem was never that you loved too much or attached too deeply. The problem was the environment your love landed in. A good seed in poor soil doesn't reflect the quality of the seed. It reflects the quality of the soil. You were the seed. And the work now, the real work of healing, is finding better soil. Not becoming a different person, not hardening yourself, not deciding that love is too dangerous to try again, but learning what healthy soil actually looks and feels like, so that next time, and there will be a next time, you can tell the difference earlier, before you've given too much of yourself to ground that was never going to let you grow. You are allowed to miss them and still know they weren't right for you. You are allowed to grieve what could have been while accepting what was. You are allowed to be a mess about someone who hurt you, for a while, without that meaning you will be a mess forever. The missing is not the destination. It is part of the path. And the path, however painful it feels right now, does lead somewhere better. It always does, for people who are brave enough to keep walking.